China is not afraid of the United States and is ready to confront it without compromise. It certainly will not take a blow and remain silent like the Europeans. That was the core message from Hu Saiqing, a journalist close to China's Communist Party and former Global Times editor-in-chief, one of the party's propaganda arms. On October 10, 2025, hours after President Trump threatened 100% tariffs, Hu Saiqing wrote on Weibo that China is neither afraid of Washington's emotional outbursts, which have been seen many times before, nor its arrogant display. He declared that China is ready for any escalation in the trade war with the Americans and ready for even more serious crisis with them. Hu Saiqing cited recent US punitive steps, blacklisting 15 Chinese firms and sanctioning oil refineries buying Iranian crude. Then asked, shouldn't China teach the US a lesson? Americans are used to one-sided sanctions that leave others powerless. This time they were shocked. China fought back, restricting rare earth exports and halting US soybean purchases. If you haven't watched the previous episode on rare earth exports, please do. You will find the link in the description. Hu ended his post warning Trump, saying, "It's best for Trump to stop blackmailing China, and he must know that China does not accept blackmail." That summed up Beijing's stance: no tolerance for bullying or threats. China's biggest leverage is soybeans, which constitute the largest portion of US agricultural exports. By cutting purchases, Beijing choked US farmers, leaving crops piling up and pressure mounting on Trump. The central questions: can Trump really compensate farmers? How did China gain such power over US agriculture? And what's behind the soybean war? This is part of what we will discuss together in today's episode. I am your host and this is the Interrunner Plus. We have come to realize that 99% of our viewers aren't subscribed. Please subscribe to the channel if you are new here. It is the free thing you can do to support us making this type of content. On April 2nd, 2025, Trump posted Liberation Day in America, then unveiled a board titled Reciprocal Tariffs. It claimed China charged 67% on US goods. In response, he imposed a 34% tariff on Chinese imports. Just 2 days later, on April 4th, China matched the move. 34% tariff on all US imports starting April 10. US soybeans took the hardest hit by the trade war. China is the largest global importer of US soybeans. In 2024, the Chinese imported approximately $12.6 billion worth of soybeans from the US alone. Today, China's imports of US soybeans stands at zero. According to the American Soybean Association, the Chinese stopped buying US soybeans last May, a catastrophe for American farmers. More than half of US soybean exports are sold to China. For example, in the 2023-2024 season, the Chinese bought 22% of the total US harvest and 52% of the total US export. The US soybean industry developed over the past 40 years based on meeting this huge Chinese demand. The bigger problem for the farmers is that there is no other buyer. China is not only the world's largest importer of soybeans, but it imports 61% of the total volume traded globally. When China walked away, US farmers were left with mountains of unsold crop while Beijing turned to Brazil and Argentina. All summer, Beijing refused to buy, using soybeans as leverage. By September harvest, the pressure on US farmers was crushing. On August 11, Trump claimed on his Truth Social that China was worried about soybean shortages. He stated, "Our farmers produce the most robust soybean. I hope China will quickly quadruple its soybean orders." On August 19th, the American Soybean Association warned Trump of a disaster, saying that soybean farmers are suffering severe financial pressure and prices continue to fall, while farmers are paying increasing amounts for inputs and equipment, obviously because of the high tariff. They warned that US farmers couldn't survive a long trade war with their main customer. Beijing ignored all pleas. There was another reason besides pressure. Analyst Cameron Johnson, a partner at Tidal Wave Solutions supply chain consulting firm, says, "For China, the US has become an unreliable supplier that might cut off soybeans, natural gas, or any other resource at any moment, as it is currently doing with the electronic chips." Soybeans are vital for China's food security, feed for 400 million pigs, the nation's main protein source. Depending on a volatile US leader like Trump is a risk. Thus, China has a strategic interest in reducing US soybean imports and diversifying its suppliers base. China also built reserves of around 44 million tons. Harvest season arrived in September with no deal in sight. Prices collapsed under the weight of unsold crops. In a statement to the Wall Street Journal, Ron Kindred, a farmer planting 1,700 acres of corn and soybeans in Illinois, said, "We're going to collapse economically if we don't reach an agreement with China soon." There doesn't seem to be any urgency on China's side, and more urgency coming from the farm community in the US. Kindred noted that halfway through the harvest season, he had only secured contracts for 40% of his crop and the other 60% is a gamble. In early October, Trump tried to calm farmers on Truth Social. He accused China of avoiding purchases for negotiating purposes only. He promised farmers that the government had earned substantial money from tariffs, and a small portion would be distributed as subsidies. He vowed to meet Xi Jinping within weeks, with soybeans being a primary topic of discussion. Trump had done this before. He offered support to farmers in his first term because of trade tension with China. The support back then was worth $23 billion. The new bailout might reach $50 billion. This aid would require congressional approval, complicated by a severe disagreement between Republicans and Democrats that caused the US government to shut down beginning October 1st. Dear viewers, let me share my view here. Tell me yours in the comments. If the US cannot persuade China to return quickly, in the long term, America's soybean sector could collapse and farmers' lives be ruined. Here's why. Beginning in the 1990s, when farmers noticed increasing Chinese demand, farmers replaced traditional crops like wheat with soybeans. Between 1995 and 2024, the soybean acreage in the US increased by 40%. If China keeps viewing the US as an unreliable trade partner and continues relying on Brazil and Argentina, returning to the US market will be costly, as China will invest in infrastructure in those supplier countries. The shift is already real. Between January and August, Brazil sent China 66 million tons, 3/4 of its exports. What do you think? Do you agree? Tell me in the comments. The problem is deeply political. The hardest hit states, Illinois, Iowa, Minnesota, Nebraska, Indiana, are Republican heartland, a danger for Trump ahead of the 2026 midterms. Former US trade official Harry Brodman says, Beijing wants Trump to feel pain by having American farmers point to him and say, "This man is the reason this is happening, and his presence is a loss to us." The plan is working. Farm lobbies once loyal to Trump now complain tariffs drove China away. Furthermore, the entire agricultural sector is impacted. In the first 7 months, US farm exports to China fell 53% compared to the same period the previous year, according to data from the US Department of Agriculture. Trump can't ignore these farmers. 90% of rural voters backed him. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said their interests are his. However, the season is ending. Peak harvest in October and in November, and Trump has no immediate solution. Beijing accepts economic pain rather than appear weak. Trump's confrontational policy of pressure solves problems that worked elsewhere have failed with China, which holds plenty of leverage. After Beijing curbed rare earth exports, which you should know all about from our last episode, it's very important to watch that episode to understand the bigger picture. Trump threatened another 100% tariff starting November 1st and said he saw no reason to meet Xi at the October 30th APEC summit. Farmers hoping for a deal were dismayed. The meeting wasn't officially cancelled, only threatened online, but the crisis deepened. And this leads me to the question of the episode. Could Trump's confrontational style, effective elsewhere but not with China, eventually trigger a military clash before his term ends? Tell me what you think. I will watch out for your answers in the comments. This is the Interrunner Plus. Please like this video and subscribe to the channel. It costs nothing but helps us a lot.